All right, so we have been studying the progressive era up until now, which talks all about the domestic issues. Domestic means issues that happen inside the United States of America. During the same time period, we have some foreign affairs issues, meaning these are things that take place outside of the United States of America. One of those events was the Spanish-American War. So we're going to start today with the Spanish-American War. All right. The idea, the foreign policy that we were following during this time period was the policy of imperialism. All countries, really, around the world had been imperialistic for many, many years. They had been taking over different areas of the world and making colonies for their natural resources, for new markets to sell their goods. Imperialism is simply when a stronger nation takes over a weaker nation. They do this for two primary purposes. The first is to obtain resources, and the second is to obtain military or naval bases so that they can strengthen their power if ever attacked. There were some people in America who were anti-imperialists, so they were against imperialism. They felt very uneasy about the expansion, felt like we should worry about our own affairs at home. They felt imperialism violated democratic principles. Remember, we were once a colony of Great Britain, and we fought for our independence. So there were many people who felt that it was wrong and it violated our ideas about democracy for us to take over other areas and have them as colonies. They also opposed the acquisition of territories. They felt that we should leave nations to be their own sovereign nations and that we should worry about our affairs at home. So what do we want to gain through imperialism, through going out and conquering and taking over or annexing other areas? The main issue is resources. When we talk about resources, we're talking about things like oil, timber, coal. In some places it's sugar. We really want to possess the sugar of Cuba and Hawaii. These are resources that we can't get enough of in our own country, and so we think by having colonies in other areas we can get our hands on these resources. More markets, meaning places to sell our goods. So to sell the things that we actually make in America, we want to be able to sell them to foreign countries. And then the third is that military bases. We want to protect ourselves from other countries who might want to colonize as well. And when we are protected by having military bases and refueling stations for our ships, we feel safer. So this is what we wanted to gain with our imperialism. Henry Cabot Lodge was a prominent imperialist during this time period. He was a senator of Massachusetts. And he was a proponent or in favor of, he wanted the U.S. to become an imperialist nation. The reason that Henry Cabot Lodge wanted us to have, to take over other nations was because he wanted to strengthen the United States economy. Our economy would be stronger because of having more resources and more markets. So he really adhered to the first two reasons for imperialism. Another man who was an imperialist during this time period was Alfred Thayer Mann. He wrote a book called The Influence of Sea Power Upon History. And he really adhered to imperialism because of that third point, or what we would gain, which is a stronger military presence. He wanted the U.S. to have a very strong navy. He wanted the U.S. to become an imperial power so that we would have refueling stations around the ocean and places for our navy to dock. He was a strong advocate for overseas expansion, primarily for our military influence. So Henry Cabot Lodge was more for the resources and the markets and the economy, while Alfred Thayer Mann was for the military influence. So remember, Alfred Thayer Mann wanted a strong navy. Navy costs are extremely expensive. Overseas expansion associated with the Spanish-American War increased those navy costs. Navy was very expensive. But if we were getting new markets and new resources, then the imperialists said that it was worth it. Young men wanted for the U.S. Navy pay $17.60 to $77 per month, and allowances for board, lodging, medical. First outfit uniform is free, an opportunity for promotion, liberal pay to those who prove efficient. So lots of advertising to grow our Navy to fill those ships we were building. All right, so let's roll in to the Spanish-American War, and let's start out by talking about the causes of the Spanish-American War. Remember we talked about muckraking journalism during the Progressive Era, which were investigative reporters who were exposing corruption. During the Spanish-American War, we have journalists who practice yellow journalism. While muckraking is doing something good for society, yellow journalism is hype. It's sensationalized news. It's bold and exaggerated headlines. And it led to the U.S. becoming involved in this war with Spain because of Cuba. Journalists were reporting things in a way that wasn't totally accurate. It was overblown, exaggerated. We've got destruction of warship Maine was the work of an enemy. So we're going to look at the explosion on the USS Maine, which was a Navy ship for America, and how it was reported on in the newspapers. Sensationalized news, you can think about tabloid type news. You know, a story that says that Hillary Clinton adopts an alien baby. It's just false news, but people read it and some people believe it, and that's what was going on with yellow journalism. You know, we hear all about fake news nowadays, and it's that kind of idea that journalists don't always tell the complete truth, and you need to look at lots of sources in order to get to the truth. Two famous yellow journalists were William Randolph Hearst and Joseph Pulitzer. Both lied about the explosion on the USS Maine, and they were for the war. The war would give them something more to report about, which would sell more newspapers. And so William Randolph Hearst and Joseph Pulitzer were pro-war, pro-imperialists. Their articles led to protests among Americans. Americans read their articles and were upset with Spain and wanted to help the people of Cuba. So what was this issue with the USS Maine? Well, the USS Maine was sent to Cuba to protect lives of Americans. We had many people living in Cuba that were American. They were running sugar plantations. And so we sent the USS Maine to protect their interests because the Cubans were rebelling against Spain. When the boat exploded and sunk in Havana Harbor, Cuba, it killed 258 American soldiers. And this is what was reported. It was reported that this attack was this explosion was an attack by Spain. This, of course, was not substantiated, and the newspapers didn't know if this was true or not, so they reported on it in a very exaggerated way in our newspapers. They ran ads that showed Spain as an awful brute with bloody hands and a knife murdering our sailors. We can see it says Maine sailors murdered by Spain. So we end up going to war with Spain. One group that fights in this war is the Rough Riders. This is the United States fleet that sailed to the Philippines. Theodore Roosevelt led this group. They were called the Rough Riders. They were made up of cowboys and oil workers, and they were rough around the edges. They were able to defeat the Spanish at San Juan Hill in Cuba. There is Mr. Teddy Roosevelt as a Rough Rider. This is before he becomes president during the Progressive Era.